Today on The Question Is with Anthony Portantino, we're going to discuss tragic events 100 years ago that took the lives of 1.5 million men, women, and children during the Armenian Genocide. And then we're going to discuss the positive response from our own U.S. government to that tragedy. A positive response we made as a nation 100 years ago, but sadly find too politically difficult to make today. You won't want to miss this show. Joining me on The Question Is with Anthony Portantino are Vanna Kitsinian and Ayk Dikijian, members of the Armenian National Committee of America's Western Region, America We Thank You initiative. Today we will learn about the great tragedy of the first genocide of the 20th century and how the U.S., led by President Woodrow Wilson and countless philanthropic people from across our nation, responded with the largest relief effort of that time. Thank you for joining us. Vanna, 1915, 100 years ago, April 24th, the Armenian Genocide began. Could you talk a little bit about what happened on April 24th in 1915?
Sure. Well, that's actually regarded, that date, April 24th, is regarded as the first or the beginning of the Armenian Genocide. Although we had experienced massacres in the years prior to 1915, that is the day that marks the official beginning, because that is the day that 250 intellectuals and leaders of the Armenian community in the Ottoman Empire, particularly the men, were rounded up and killed. And from that point forward, there were mass deportations, massacres that basically was the reason of the Armenian Genocide. And so this year marks the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, and Armenians all throughout the world will be commemorating this crime against humanity. And that's why we're here today, to remind the world of this event and talk about our initiative of America We Thank You.
Right, well, thank you for being here, and I thank you too for being here as well. I think it's important to note that massacres happened before 1915, and as historians have written about, the Armenian community in the Ottoman Empire at the time had started to educate itself, sending many of its prominent citizens off to Europe to get college education, secondary education, and were starting to assert its rights. And so how did that, do you think, tied into the events of April 24th? Do you think the burgeoning human rights outcry from Europe and within the Ottoman Empire were starting to ignite the flame of independence?
Yeah, that's definitely possible. And also the fact that during World War I, Turkey had expended a lot of costs at the time. So not only were there religious factors, Armenia being a Christian state amongst a Muslim empire, but the fact that at the time Turkey was had expended a lot of money into the war and needed to kind of recoup some of those funds. And so another theory as to why they committed the genocide, aside from religious reasons and to Turkify the Ottoman Empire, was to recoup that money that they had lost. Armenians in the Ottoman Empire at the time had a lot of wealth. Mm-hmm. They were well off, and unfortunately they were a minority that was targeted by the government.
Also the churches as well too, weren't the churches seized, and the property and the land and the wealth of the churches within the Ottoman Empire were decimated? Right.
All of our churches were confiscated and destroyed. In fact, today, the Catholicosate of Sis, the original Sis, seat of the Holy See, that is today based in Lebanon was originally in the Ottoman Empire, and the leader of our church, His Holiness Adam I, is actually initiating a lawsuit to recoup those lands that rightfully belong to the Catholic State of Cilicia. And that is just one among hundreds and hundreds of monasteries, churches, structures of immense cultural value that were destroyed, confiscated, and usurped by the Turkish Ottoman Empire, and which have still not rightfully been returned to the Armenian people.
Right, and one of the things we're asking the U.S. government to do is to help put pressure to return those church lands as well as the private property.
Absolutely.
As well. And that's part of the political effort. Obviously, Congressman Adam Schiff and others have been fighting that political battle, as well as recognition. Historically, in 1915, how did the U.S. find out? How was it on the front page of the New York Times? How did it become such a big issue in this country that today, 100 years later, proves the point that it happened?
Well, at the time, the U.S. ambassador to Constantinople, Henry Morgenthau, he saw the atrocities firsthand that were happening to the Armenians in 1915. He sent a letter and he urged Congress to start an organization, and he also extended an invitation to his philanthropist friends to start an organization, which was the NER. And that happened, that occurred, and the Near East Relief at that time was responsible for raising millions and millions of dollars from 1915 to 1930. They raised, I think, about $117 million, which in today's dollars is about $2.5 or $2.8 billion.
$2.8 billion. So the U.S. ambassador in the Ottoman Empire witnessed firsthand the crimes against humanity, sent a message to Woodrow Wilson defining what had happened. There were also some European photographers that were in the Ottoman Empire, or Western Armenia at the time, who chronicled what had gone on. Could you walk us through some of the historic evidence that exists, which
Sure.
is sort of ironic of why we don't have a recognition today?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There is a treasure trove of documentation, from archival documents to photographs to letters, congressional letters that were sent, that day in and day out document the Armenian Genocide. And part of our committee, the America We Thank You Committee's mission, is to bring together all of that documentation, which in and of itself is evidence of what took place, the historical reality of the Armenian Genocide. And our committee has done that. We've undertaken the task of compiling documentation on every state in the United States and their response to the Armenian Genocide, and we've created fact sheets that summarize every state's contribution, whether it was financial, donation of flour and clothing, all kinds of other resources. And as you mentioned, there are European photographers and eyewitnesses, and there are countless books about the eyewitness accounts that people wrote about of what they experienced, documenting the realities of that horrific time in history. So there's really no question about the fact that this has occurred. As you mentioned, the New York Times in 1915 alone, they published more than 160 articles documenting and reporting on the atrocities against the Armenians, which are all accessible. They're public records. Right. The Library of Congress has voluminous boxes and documentation about not only the crimes that were committed against the Armenians, but also the response of the American people and the American government. And so on this centennial year, the Armenian National Committee of America has established the America We Thank You initiative in a way to give our collective thanks to the American people for all that they did to help save our nation from annihilation, essentially. And as Ayk mentioned, they raised $117 million. They rescued more than 132,000 orphans in the Near East region. The Near East Relief established more than 400 orphanages, hospitals, training, vocational schools, and took in these refugees. And today we have members of families all across the world that grew up in these orphanages, and today they're a testament to what the American people did for us in our darkest hour.
Right. Armenian American families in California, in America, have personal stories
Right.
that have been handed down from the survivors. And you know, I've had the honor and privilege to meet some survivors who were, you know, in their early hundreds, 104, 103. And each of you, your family, has a not, I don't want to say unique, but a shared story about how you stand as a testament to the survival of the Armenian people. Would you feel comfortable sharing your personal story, or?
Sure. Well, my grandfather, he was raised in, born in Harput, rather, and on April 24th, or sometime in 1915, the Turkish military came to the village and rounded up all the men and took them away for questioning. My grandfather was 2 years old at the time, and the only reason he survived was because their relatives made boots for the Turkish army, and so his family was protected. But everybody else in the village, or a lot of other people, they didn't have the means to escape, or you know, the men, women, and children were deported. And as you know, that these deportations were pretty much death marches, marching
Right.
millions of miles across the desert with little to no food and water, and you know, getting killed along the way. So that's how my grandfather survived, and it's just really tragic that there's so many of these stories throughout, you know, all of my friends and family and cousins, and I'm sure Vanna has some as well.
And you know, members of our committee, of the America We Thank You committee, almost each one of us has a personal story that way, of either a grandparent or a great-grandparent that was either killed, and if they were one of the lucky ones to survive, their parents were certainly massacred, and they were left orphaned, and they grew up in one of these Near East relief orphanages. So this is something that has touched the fabric of Armenian society in all places around the world, and it's something that unites us, but unfortunately it's something common that stems out of such a tragedy.
Right.
But amidst that tragedy, there's also an example of inspirational humanitarian spirit which the American people and government demonstrated towards our nation, which is why we take this opportunity on the centennial to, of course, commemorate the losses and the martyrs that we lost, but also to give thanks to that country for everything that they did. I mean, if you think about it, hundreds of missionaries left their comfortable lives in America and traveled across the world during a world war to go to the aid of a people that they didn't know, an unknown people called the Armenians in the Near East. And so that, I think, is a remarkable story of love and compassion, love for mankind, and it really is a great example of our humanitarian spirit. And I think it's reminding Americans about this history is also can serve as a catalyst to return to those values today. You know, we see so much of these atrocities continuing today, and one of the reasons is because when we don't take a stand against genocide, and of course the Armenian genocide was the first genocide of the 20th century, and if we don't stand up and speak the truth about what has happened, you only allow those kind of travesties to continue. And of course, we had the Holocaust after the Armenian genocide in Cambodia and Rwanda and Darfur, and it continues, unfortunately, throughout. And
Adolf Hitler referenced the Armenian genocide as he was enacting what he called the final solution at the time.
Right. Who today remembers the Armenians?
Right, that was his quote. Obviously, we're going to talk about sort of the big irony is that America was the eyewitness to the tragedy 100 years ago, but today finds it difficult to formally recognize, though we have 45 states, I believe, that have recognized the genocide. When we come back on The Question Is with Anthony Portantino, we're going to continue to celebrate the America We Thank You campaign and the events that our country and we all should be proud of 100 years ago, but also I think we share in the collective responsibility of why we don't recognize the genocide today. So join us when we come back. Thank you.
Nothing ever gonna make this world better if we don't start believing that love really, really, really is the answer. Everybody join hands 'cause it's time now.
We're back on The Question Is with Anthony Portantino with Vanna and Ayk, talking about the tragedy of the Armenian Genocide and the positive response that the U.S. government had back 100 years ago, and why it's so difficult today to see the same respect given by our country. It is 100 years later, and the United States government for the last 3 decades has found it difficult to recognize the Armenian Genocide. Why do you think that's been so difficult when we were the finders of the proof 100 years ago?
That's really the ironic part about this history, is that, as you said, America led this relief initiative. They were the champion of human rights when it came to responding to the Armenian Genocide, but unfortunately today there's really just one main reason, and that's geopolitics. Turkey is an ally in the region, and they have important military bases there that they want to maintain those relationships in a healthy state, and for that reason they have remained silent when it comes to calling this atrocity what it was, which is a genocide. And there have been examples of U.S. presidents in the past that acknowledge it, but we have not had a formal recognition and declaration that has been unequivocal, although as we mentioned earlier, the documentation and the historical reality and all of the evidence is there. There's no question about it, and historians of genocide and international law have agreed that it is nothing short of a genocide.
And the phrase genocide, was the historian that coined the phrase.
Raphael Lemkin, yeah.
Lemkin was referring to the Armenian Genocide when he created the phrase to describe the Armenian Genocide. So it is something that we all should put pressure on. Obviously, locally, our elected officials in California have done the right thing, as of 45, I think it's 45 other states. So Congress has done the right thing. We really do need to put pressure on the president to say the word. And with the Pope, with Pope Francis coming out this week and putting the full weight and pressure of the Roman Catholic Church, I mean, how was that received in the community?
Well, I mean, it was very welcomed within the community, and we really respected Pope Francis for doing that, because he went out on a limb, in a sense, to do that. Not because it wasn't a genocide, but because he's going to ruffle feathers, obviously, in Turkey. But again, this is a humanitarian issue. It's not just a political issue.
Right.
And a genocide of 1.5 million people is something that needs to be acknowledged, and it can't be. I don't think the government should mince words when talking about a genocide like that, and they definitely shouldn't bow to a foreign government to dictate their policy on this issue. It's something that they need to stand for, like they did in 1915 with the Near East relief effort.
And Pope Francis's sort of poetic, poignant words were talking about a wound left untreated cannot heal.
And that's a valid point, because the reconciliation can never begin unless there's recognition of the crime committed.
Right.
And unfortunately, our wounds are still open, because Turkey till this day denies that a genocide occurred. And they cowardly just say that, there were deaths on both sides.
Right.
It was a casualty of war, but of course that wasn't the case. There's so much documentation that this was a state-executed motive to basically wipe out the Armenian people from the Ottoman Empire, and that there was only room for Turks in Turkey.
Right. Well, I've seen the, last year there was a presentation, and it was a Turkish historian who had the memos to the Turkish government with quotas.
That's right.
You're not basically killing enough people on certain benchmarks. So when you have documents that have quotas of death in writing in official government communications, it should be something that is easy to pronounce.
And the Ottoman government, actually, after the genocide, convicted the perpetrators of war crimes, acknowledging the genocide. Unfortunately, when the new regime came into the picture, they gave them all pardons. But I mean, it's a globally recognized genocide. I mean, France, Italy, Germany, they've all recognized it, in addition to many other countries. And I think the U.S. knows what happened. I mean, like Vanna mentioned, they have recognized it in the past through congressional resolutions and also presidential proclamation. But I think they want to do the right thing, but they have pressure, and hopefully they will do the right thing this year.
Hopefully they will do the right thing. Obviously, one of the most important pieces of history is to teach history, is to educate the next generation both about the Armenian Genocide, Darfur, Cambodia, the Holocaust. Part of what you're doing nationwide is an education effort, both in the classroom as well as through the media. There's been some successes in California. Could you touch upon what I know Assemblymember Audrey Nazarian last year was quite proud of some important accomplishments.
Yeah, California definitely has kind of spearheaded that effort, and we want to incorporate in the social studies curriculum the Armenian Genocide as part of U.S. history, because we always say that this is not just a part of Armenian history, this is it's a glorious part of American history, so definitely it should be taught in the 10th grade curriculum of U.S. history, and we are taking steps to incorporate the Near East relief angle tied to the Armenian Genocide historical aspect into the educational curriculum. As you said, Assemblymember Nazarian, Khacha Chajian as well, among others, have initiated legislative steps to move that forward, and they're all positive responses. In terms of our committee's work, we also, educational outreach is a big part of what we do as well. And so we have started with educating our own committee, making presentations about the Near East relief in all Armenian schools, which we concluded months ago. And now we have moved on to the college campuses. And we'll continue to do that in non-Armenian public and private schools as well. That has already begun. We have an exhibit that we actually debuted in early March, which is currently being housed at the Los Angeles Public Library atrium. It's a 28-panel color exhibit with life-size panels and photographs, archival, all kinds of text to basically tell the story of the Near East relief, America's response, and also the backdrop, which is, of course, the genocide that occurred. I don't know if you've noticed, but billboards have been erected all throughout Los Angeles County, paying homage and tribute to the Near East relief for 100 years of philanthropy. And there's information there on our website, www.americawethankyou.org. We passed resolutions in California Assembly and Senate recognizing the work of the Near East relief last year, and we'll continue to do that in other states as we go forward. Ayk can tell us a little bit more about what we've been doing in terms of educational outreach.
Well, one of the really cool things that the Near East Relief Campaign did was they started this thing called Golden Rule Sunday. And the idea behind Golden Rule Sunday was you have an orphan-style dinner for your Sunday dinner, a simple meal as an orphan would have, not fancy. And the money you save having that simple meal, you donate that to the Near East Relief effort and to help the orphans in Armenia. So we incorporated that concept when we did the presentations throughout Southern California in the Armenian schools. We did the presentation on Near East Relief, and then we also had the kids eat a orphan-style lunch to honor that, that campaign as well.
Yeah, and there are so many Americans, non-Armenians today, who remember their parents saying, clean your plate, think of the starving Armenians.
Right. My mother was one of them. My mother, I grew up in New Jersey, and obviously with the Woodrow Wilson legacy in New Jersey, I remember my mom talking about the Armenian Genocide and talking and being aware of it, much more so then than a non-Armenian family today might be aware of it.
And you know, let's talk about the fact that this was there was such a mass media component to this relief effort. They mobilized every segment of society, from handicapped children who were donating their piggy bank money to Congress, members of Congress, obviously the presidential level, to lay people, to Hollywood as well. Jackie Coogan was the most famous child star at the time.
Right.
And he went on a children's crusade and traveled throughout the world to raise money, and he raised more than $1 million. He had milk crusade where he would collect condensed milk, and every child who came to see his films, the entry, instead of a ticket, was they would donate a can of condensed milk, which was then shipped over to the Near East to feed the Armenian orphans in Near East relief orphanages. So this is something that really mobilized the nation and then spanned the entire globe. So it was an American-led initiative, but then it continued throughout the world. Countries like Cuba and China and all countries in South America and India were a part of this relief effort. So if you think about what this country did for 15 consecutive years to help the minorities, specifically the Armenians in the Near East, it's really a remarkable story.
And how many orphans are we talking about? How many? I mean,
hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands. So 1.5 million men, women, and children were killed. Death marches, hangings, massacres, and then we're left with hundreds of thousands of children that our country came in and helped.
They saved them.
They saved them.
They saved over 1 million people and rescued, I think, 132,000 orphans.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that needs to be in the history book. That needs,
Absolutely.
I mean, I remember in the 5th grade, you know, when we talked about World War II, I remember learning about the Holocaust. I remember seeing the pictures. But we did not, when we talked about World War I, talk about the first genocide. And I'm glad in California we're changing that. As you continue to go out into the community, even in 2015 California, the Turkish government continues to work against many of these initiatives. I know when I was in the legislature, there were lobbying efforts against us. Do you see that waning or increasing as you do your laudable work?
It's definitely increasing because as the pressure's getting hotter for the Turkish government, as more and more people are acknowledging the genocide, as they're being put on the hot seat, they're spending millions and millions of dollars every year to lobby against genocide recognition. They've been successful a couple of times, they've been unsuccessful a lot of times as well. But they recently hired Dick Gebhardt's firm in order to lobby.
Former congressman.
Former congressman.
Presidential candidate.
And he used to be a friend, you know, a proponent of recognizing the genocide. So that was very disappointing to us. And that's the thing. I mean, the Armenians, we have a big community in Los Angeles and in the diaspora. There's a lot of diaspora and Armenians because of the genocide. And, you know, we have a big grassroots foundation. And we try to raise money to help lobby and try to, you know, push forward our cause. But it's just very difficult to compete against the government that's spending millions of dollars to try to deny a historical fact.
I know even in Pasadena, when we were beginning to build the memorial, the Turkish government immediately went to the city of Pasadena to protest a recognition in a community that has had a history of Armenian Americans in Pasadena since the genocide, I mean, since the diaspora. So, I mean, your efforts to both educate, communicate, and commemorate are to be commended. One of the things that makes me proud is I grew up in New Jersey, and my home congressman, Frank Pallone, is one of the leaders of the Armenian American Caucus in Congress, and then I obviously come to California, and Congressman Adam Schiff is one of our leaders. So thank you very much for being on the show and sharing your mission. Obviously, we're going to put your website so people know what the ANC is doing, Armenian National Committee, and the America We Thank You committee and program. So thank you. I think, you know, William Saroyan said it best, and I think your presence here and the presence in California, and I'm going to end with his famous quote, which is so poignant to what's going on in California today. Saroyan said, "I should like to see any power of the world destroy this race, this small tribe of unimportant people whose wars have all been fought and lost, whose structures have all crumbled, literature is unread, music is unheard, and prayers are no more answered. Go ahead and destroy Armenia. See if you can do it. Send them into the desert without bread and water. Burn their homes and churches. Then see if they will not laugh, sing, and pray again. For when two of them meet anywhere in the world, see if they will not create a new Armenia." your presence today. The community's thriving in California, and thank you on this solemn commemoration.
Thank you, and
Thank
I would
you
just
so much.
encourage everybody, if they would, this year obviously the March for Justice on
Right.
April 24th is so very important. It's going to start in Little Armenia in Hollywood all the way to the Turkish consulate, so we really encourage everyone to join in solidarity with the Armenian people and march for justice on April 24th this year and every year going forward.
Thank you.